You're listening to The Afternoon Show with Anne Marie Wallace. My guest today is a writer, mother, entrepreneur, burnout expert, businesswoman, and as she says, a dreamer and effervescent optimist. My word. Bianca Best joins me now all the way from Surrey. How you doing, Bianca?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me on the show today.
It sounds to me like you have it all, but then you've written a book about burnout. So I suspect that at times you have had to juggle too much and maybe it's all been a bit too much for you.
Yes, absolutely. And it's a very fine line between having it all and doing it all. And I've certainly learned the hard way. And it certainly was never my childhood dream to become a burnout authority. But that's where I find myself. So I've had a career of leaning into ambitions and passions and call my CV a chronology of passions explored. But along the way, yes, I've achieved success, but I used to slam into walls again and again and again. So I've really had to work out how I could not shrink my dreams and carry on being a mother and author and all those lovely things you just described, but doing so without falling over.
So you've written a book called Big Impact Without Burnout, which we will talk about in a wee minute. Tell us about you. You know, you mentioned there you're a mother. You grew up in Surrey.
Yeah, I grew up in Surrey and I've always been very ambitious and have leaned into where my passions have taken me. And I have fallen into writing, entrepreneurialism, and a corporate career. Career responsibility has expanded. Simultaneously, life has expanded. I've been blessed with 4 children, and the third pregnancy was a total surprise, and even more of a surprise when we found out it was twins. So I certainly had 4 children under 7 and a business to run. So I've had career expansion, I've had family expansion, and I have inevitably had knowledge expansion as life has exploded into the grown-up world that we all orbit. That was an incredibly exhilarating ride, but I started in my mid-20s at the point of launching my first business, of having a young family. I started experiencing burnout, and that went on for a decade. It was an incredibly intense period of career growth, of personal growth, but I didn't know how to self-manage. Actually, I was succumbing to that myth of having it all and assumed that meant doing it all. Where everyone in the household would get a cold, for instance, I would get a full-on flu, and then eventually they got worse and worse, where I would get pneumonia, I would get bronchiolitis, tonsillitis, everyitis, conjunctivitis. And eventually I ended up being hospitalized with total immune collapse. And the doctor said to me, my entire body was starting to shut down because I was so chronically stressed. And it took me a while to actually acknowledge and recognize that the way I was living my life was not conducive to me sustaining success. So over the next few years, I started really experimenting with myself and how I could feel well and prioritize well-being as well as all the work impacts that I wanted to have. But I had to work out how I could do that. And eventually I did. And I haven't burnt out since 2015. And I've really bottled up now how I did that and devote my work, my life to inspiring other ambitious souls to make sure they don't make the mistakes that I did.
I mean, obviously your burnout sounded so extreme and so dramatic. You know, not everyone ends up with pneumonia and all of that. But I suppose burnout it has different elements to it. And a lot of people, a lot of parents day to day, they're trying to juggle jobs and children and life and schedules, let alone your additional trying to write books and build an empire and all of that. But from my own experience, juggling work and children and trying to be all things to all people can be physically exhausting, and yet I can never sleep. Or some days just the smallest thing I will be in tears for no apparent reason. Would that be an element of burnout? Is that, because I would say quite a lot of people probably are dealing with that element.
Absolutely. The most common precursor to sliding negatively down into burnout is that sensation of a loss of control, where you feel, as you've just described, those demands assault you from every single direction, whether it's your boss or it's your kids. There's a need for you to show up for someone else. And so you start to look at that task list, your to-do list, and rather than it being inspiring and invigorating and you can't wait to get your teeth into that, it just becomes overwhelming and you feel a sense of needing to do battle with the task list. And that is a moment of overwhelm, a moment that starts to create this foggy thinking, this fatigue, this physical shrinking where we're energetically depleted. We feel that we don't have enough time to do the things that we want to do, and we become overwhelmed, and a spiral of chaos, mental chaos, starts to consume us. And emotionally, it's interesting that you just raised the fact that you'll feel teary, because that's really common as well. And hence the fact that my work is around this holistic approach to burnout. It is not just physical, it's not just mental either, but it's absolutely emotional too. And we need to pay attention to all three aspects of self to make sure that we are self-managing and operating in a way where we thrive. But that takes really conscious work.
We all have such busy lives. Bianca, what tips can you give us to help us keep in the straight and narrow and avoid burnout?
We have to take responsibility for our own energy. And one thing I'll emphasize that I think is often creating even more of a sense of stress is that the well-being advice out there is abundant, and it can become confusing just to actually try and cut through and work out what should I do for myself. How you react to stress will be different to how I react to stress, physiologically and mentally and emotionally. So we have to make sure that we create a plan that is bespoke for us. Never assume that just because some friend has just adopted a new technique that it will work for you too. It won't necessarily. And I talk about decisions being our superpower. And once we start owning the decisions that we make around key aspects of ourselves, we can start to get into a place of strong empowerment. And that's what we want. My book focuses on 8 strategies. The first 4 strategies focus on energy, mindset, time, and intention. Our energy is this almost magical resource that we have within ourselves, and we have the ability to create energy and also to deplete energy. But it's up to us to really understand what in our lives is shrinking and draining our energy and where we get our energy from. So energy, I mean, how does that sound when I ask you to think about your energy levels and looking at your life holistically based on your energy? How does that chime with you?
Yeah, juggling too many things at once, probably not focusing on any one thing. And that's exhausting. It's exhausting in your head because you've got these lists that never end and you never really get them ticked off either. So you can never get a state of relaxation ever, can you?
Yeah, exactly. And I was doing a keynote yesterday and someone asked, well, what do I actually do when I've got so much that I need to do? And I said, try and prioritize based on following your energy. What makes you feel most excited, most alive, and is the most important. So what is the next right thing? There's always going to be something to do. So we've got to very artfully design where we focus our time and our energy. And then when it comes to time, it's about that focused attention that is subjective. And too many of us are experiencing life with this realm of objective attention. And what that means is we're being distracted and there is noise, whether it's people, habits, whether it's media, it's distracting us from what is core to our value set and to what matters most and to what energizes us. But it's for us to make sure that we unlock the potential in our lives to be managing time flow in this way.
How do you switch off?
I absolutely need space. And this is what's very key for each and every one of us to understand. A little bit of healthy stress is great. It's invigorating and motivating. It's good to push our boundaries and do new stuff. So I do love that. But for me, that knowledge of how I rest and rejuvenate is key. And for everyone, remember this equation that stress plus rest equals growth. So for me to rejuvenate, I need to be alone. And my bedroom is my absolute sanctuary. It's my haven. It's where I go to retreat from the world. And the kids know when my door is shut, that really is my sacred restorative time. And I need silence. I need to be alone. I need my journal. And so, that's an example of how I'll restore when I'm at home and I've got space.
Wow. Well, Bianca Best, thank you so much for joining me on the afternoon show today. Your book, Big Impact Without Burnout, is out now. So if people want to find out more about you, that's how they do it.
Perfect. Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
I will always remember